Hello everyone, welcome to Jolly Molly TV. Today we're going to work on these amazing borders that we just finished stitching in the last video, and we're going to attach them to the quilt. This is going to be exciting. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to measure these strips. This is a smaller strip, so this is going to be one of the top or bottom strips. I suggest starting with the smaller one first to get the hang of what we're doing before we tackle the long side strips. Okay, this currently measures just under 3 inches wide, and we want it to be 2.5 inches wide. So now if you take a look at these black tack down lines, this is the black thread that we used to tack down the fabric when we were making these blocks. Okay, I want to take a look at that. And I want to get my ruler out, and if I measure just the black stitch lines from one to the other, it's 2.25 inches. So it's not quite big enough. This needs to be 2.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up the 1/8 mark up here right on that black stitch line, and I'm going to come down here and line up the 1/8 mark. Once I've done that, I can take a look at this right side, and I can see the black stitch line right about there. There's 1/8 of an inch, just shy of 2.5 inches. I'm going to make sure that I am 1/8 of an inch just past that black stitch line. So I have these lined up so that the ruler extends 1/8 of an inch past that black tack down line, that black stitch line. Now, before I do any cutting, I want to visually look at this, knowing that this block needs to measure 2.5 inches wide. If I pretend this was cut and I come in 1/4 inch, it is just before the first stitch of that purple embroidery line. I check up here. 1/4 inch is just up to that first purple line of that embroidery. I come over here. I come in 1/4 inch from where I'm going to cut, and it is just above that embroidery. Same thing up here. That tells me that this position is correct, so that I'm not going to cut off any of this amazing embroidery from top to bottom. So when I sew my 1/4 inch seam allowance, it's not going to dig into the embroidery. So that's where I want to be. So bottom line, you want to place your ruler 1/8 of an inch past that black stitch line on this side, and then make sure it's also 1/8 of an inch past that black stitch line on that top side, and then we can go ahead and trim. Okay, hold it steady and trim. Then I'm going to come down here and do the same thing and cut that. Okay, so then that is 1/8 of an inch past that stitch line. Then I can continue on doing the rest of it. Then I can flip it over this direction, use my ruler, and I can come in, and if I've done it correctly or close to correct, and I put the ruler showing that the block underneath is at 2.5 inches, I can look here and say, yeah, it's just a hair there. It's 1/8 of an inch past. Find that stitch line and go 1/8 of an inch past. And I'm pretty well spot on. So then I can trim it. Okay. So then this section, get rid of that, now is 2.5 inches wide. Does that make sense? Okay, let's do the next section. Okay, let's get rid of this. Do it one more time for you. Okay, so I'm going to again look for that black outer stitch line that was the tack down line for the fabric. I'm going to put my ruler down, and I want to go 1/8 of an inch past that tack down line. That's where I want my ruler to be. Okay, this top's a little bit harder to see, so I'm going to just put the ruler on the edge there and then go 1/8 of an inch in. My 1/8 of an inch in over here. Yep. If in doubt, move it and go 1/8 of an inch in. Okay, then we can go ahead and trim it. Then I could come this way. Okay, find that outside stitch line. Make sure you're at the 1/8 of an inch mark, and then your left side should line up. Okay, 1/8 of an inch. Your left side should land right on 2.5 inches. And it does. Okay, there's one little section I didn't trim right here. I missed this section. So I'm going to come back in. And at this point I can pretty well line up the left right at 2.5 inches. And then I just trim off that missed section. How about that? Okay, so now this measures 2.5 inches wide, and you have 1/8 of an inch on the outside of that stitch line. So when we go another 1/8 of an inch in for a total of 1/4, when we sew it, you're going to not cover any of that embroidery. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing for all of the blocks. Start with these two smaller ones first, which is the top and the bottom, and get those all lined up 2.5 inches wide. Then you can tackle the longer side blocks, the left and right side. Make all of these strips 2.5 inches wide, and I'll meet you right back here. All right, isn't this amazing? The more and more I look at this, the more and more I love these inner borders. I think it gives a really cool accent to this quilt, and I'm really hoping that it's going to come out the way I envisioned it once we add these outer borders as well. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so I have all my borders now equaling 2.5 inches wide. I have my sewing machine here with a neutral thread, either white or a beige up on top, and some white bobbin thread down below. All right, so now the first thing I want to do is I want to remember that I did these inner borders like a picture frame. So the top goes straight across, and then it turns, so like if you were on the center of the quilt looking this way, you can read the print. Center of the quilt looking that way, you can read the print. So I want to put my border in the same direction so it completes that picture frame. Okay, and now I'm getting my Clover clips out, so I will have a way of attaching this. Now if I look here, you can see here on the border, I want the embroidery to go all the way up to the top of this white strip, leaving about 1/4 inch that will disappear into the seam allowance. Okay, so that's approximately where I want my border to start. I don't want it to get swallowed up in the seam allowance as I stitch it, and I want it to start right there. So then this border will come all the way across and will basically flow into this border here. Okay, so leaving approximately 1/4 of an inch, place it down, and then I want to flip it over, and I'm going to put a clip in it, and I'm going to remeasure my 1/4 inch. And I can kind of see the bottle, where the bottle stitching ends, and then I can see the edge of my white quilt, and I can actually take a ruler and make sure that I've got this properly lined up. So I can say, okay, 1/4 of an inch in, and then I have about another 1/4 of an inch before the embroidery starts. So I can move this up just a tiny bit, line this up again. So the top of the white fabric, my inner border, there's 1/4 of an inch. And then I have about 1/8 of an inch before the bottle starts. So I'm actually going to move it back down just the smallest amount. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to get it so it'll look good as the border starts. So go back that way, right there. 1/4 inch. I think that's good. I think that's going to be good. Okay, so I'm going to attach it and just level it with the fabric below. So I want this fabric and this fabric to line up all the way down. Easy peasy. You got this. You can do it. You can do it. This is the fun part, actually seeing all of this come together. You realize how hard you've worked, how long this has taken you, how many hours of love that has gone into this, and we're almost done. All we have to do after we sew on the borders is do the embellishments, and that's it. Of course, you still have to back it and bind it, but as far as the tutorials go, I'm walking you through how to make this all the way through the embellishments, and you will be able to back it and bind it on your own, just like a regular quilt. I'll walk you through in the last video on how to attach the backing, but there's so many video tutorials out there on how to back and bind that you'll be able to find another YouTube video to do that. Yeah, it's just backing and binding just like you would any other quilt. But I'll go over that in the last video. Yeah. Almost done. I'm just going to keep attaching all the way down. All the way down. Okay. And, oops, we'll line her up at the bottom. Okay, and now you can tell we have some excess embroidery here at the end. That's what we wanted. We knew that we're going to have to trim some of this off. We wanted a little bit extra at the end so that we would have plenty to sew all of this down. I'm going to put a clip at the end too. And then we will trim it off after we've sewn everything on. Don't trim it off yet. We're going to sew this on first, sew the other side on, and then we will level this up. But this is what we wanted. We wanted a little bit excess. It's better to have a little bit too much and to trim some off than have not enough and have to re-embroider the borders. So this is cool. All right. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll this back up the other direction because I want to sew this way. Okay, so again, I'm going to just double check my beginning here, and actually I'm going to do one more binder clip. Right where those two meet. Right like that. And then I can scoot this one down and hug the end. Alright, scoot this one down a little bit more. That's where I want it to be. So that will hold that flat. Alright, so now let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, so I have a bobbin that only has a little bit of thread left in it. I'm going to go ahead and use that up. This should be okay for this side. This is a good time to use up your partial bobbins. Then I put a 1/4 inch foot here on my machine, and it has a guide on the right side so I can put my fabric right up against that guide, and it'll give me a very nice 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm using my default stitch of 2.5 that comes on when the machine comes on, so that'll give it a nice stitch length. And then I'm just going to load this machine up, and I'm going to sew this on just like we did the other borders, the inner borders. But in case you didn't watch that video, you might want to go back and check that out as to how we made these inside borders. I think it's really cool. Okay, so now I'm going to put this down. It's a little bit heavy and bulky, I think I'm going to get myself a Sew Steady table for Christmas for this machine. I think that would be very nice to have a flat surface to stitch all of these projects on. That would be cool. Alright, so I'm going to lay this on the machine bed and I'm going to put the foot down on the fabric. Okay? And I'm actually off the fabric of the border a little bit, but that's where I want to start, is on this extra piece of here. And I'm going to start a few stitches and I'm going to go down to where I hit the white border and then I'm going to back tack a few stitches. Okay? So now my main goal is to keep these two pieces together, the border and the piece underneath it, the quilt. So I'm going to take this off and I'm going to make sure that they're in alignment and I'm going to just sew nice and slow a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, bring this forward a little bit. Okay, and you can start and stop and go as fast or as slow as you want. I tend to go a little slower than most because I like to make sure that I keep my fabric together and I keep it up against that guide, and then I just keep sewing. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward through this and I'm going to sew all the way down to the end of the quilt. Here we go. Okay, now that I've reached the end of the white border, I want to back tack and lock in my stitches. Just go backwards and lock the stitches in. All right, I'm excited to see this. Okay, ready for a moment of truth? Ooh, look at that. That looks cool. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep going. And let's see. That looks cool. Oops. There we go. That looks good. That looks good, and I can take the clip off the end now and go all the way to the end. That looks really cool. All right. That looks amazing. I am happy with that attachment. Yes, I am. Okay. So we'll do all the pressing and the seams at the very end to press that down. Isn't that cool? Really am liking that. Okay. So now I want to get started on the border on the left. Okay, so I'm going to flip this around. I'm going to leave it toward the top here, because now what I want to do is I want to line up the top as well. Now you don't have to do this. You can line it up however you like, but I decided if I'm going to cut off any of this amazing embroidery, I'm going to cut it off at the bottom of the quilt. Okay? Visually, my top of my quilt is going to hopefully be level like this bottle is here with this border. Then any amount that we end up cutting off, I want to put at the bottom of my quilt. Chances are it won't be, I'm thinking, as noticeable. Everyone's going to be focused on the top part. They won't notice that we've cut this off at the bottom. But if you just want to line it up at the bottom and do it that way and cut some off at the top like Kimberbell did in their example, you can do that too. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to do a little bit of finicky here and line mine up at the top. Now see what I started to do here? Line it up, but my bottles are not in the direction of the picture frame. So I need to turn my strip down and around so that it goes this way, upside down. Just picture yourself in the middle and you're looking at the inner border that says Hocus Pocus. You want the bottles to be in that same direction. So it's actually doing a picture frame. Look at how cool that's going to be. I'm really liking this with the inner border. I think that's cool. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing that we did on this other side, where we lined the bottle up, leaving 1/4 of an inch for seam allowance before we start the strip. So I want to do the exact same thing. Okay, here's my end of my strip here with the book that's leaning up against the bottle. I want to put that up and line this up with my white inner border, and I'm going to put a clip on it. Okay. Then I want to see where's that 1/4 inch going to land for the seam allowance if I leave my strip right there. Okay, take my ruler, put 1/4 of an inch, you can see this on camera, down all the way. And I've got a little bit of room, so I want to move this strip more toward the end. I think I did too far, so let me go back. Okay. So again, I'm going to actually do it this way. 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, and then where is that going to land in relationship to this book? I have just under 1/4 of an inch between the 1/4 of an inch I'm going to allow for the seam allowance and where that design starts. So that's where I want it. Okay, again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just so that it is where you would like it to be. Okay, so now I'm going to fast forward through this and we're going to line up the border, this edge with the outer edge of the inner border. We're going to make those equal so that we can stitch this together. All right, here we go. Okay, now I've come to the bottom and that is sewn in nicely over there. So I want to make sure that I flatten this all out and then I put a clip on the end. All right, that's great. So now it just happens to be rolled up right where I need it to be to start sewing. Again, we're going to trim this off at the end when we're done, but not now. Right now, we are just going to sew this just like we did the other side. You got this. Okay. Okay. So let's get this started. Same thing. I'm going to make sure it's flat and level with the border. I'm going to put it down on the fabric just before the border starts. Make sure the border is nice and flat. Make some stitches. Go actually on the border underneath. When I know I'm on it, then I can back tack. Okay, and then we start sewing. So let's fast forward through this and let's sew this border on. You can do it. Now what mine did was mine started to move away from the guide. So I'm going to come back. I cut my thread. I'm going to come back and start here because it was pulling so much over here that it was pulling it away from the guide. So I wasn't getting a good 1/4 inch seam. All right, so let's keep going. I'm definitely getting a sew study table for myself for Christmas. That will be my gift from me to me. And what a sew study table is a flat sewing surface that will allow your project to be perfectly level and won't have the drag and the pull that it does going off the end of your machine. If you have a table that your machine can go down into, that's cool too. Because what you want is you want a flat surface coming off your machine. So there's no pull and drag. So I will be getting one of those for Christmas. That will be my reward for me for all my hard work this year and making these projects. I'll do an unboxing when I get it so you can see exactly what a sew study table is, but it's definitely something worthwhile if you're going to be doing a lot of these Kimberbell projects. It's a good investment to have. It makes your job a little bit easier and stops the arm pain as you're struggling to try to keep this project up against your 1/4 inch foot. Okay, once I get to the end and I know I'm off the bottom border, I'm going to back tack back onto that bottom border to lock in my stitches and then cut my thread. Okay, moment of truth. Here we go. And the unveiling is, that's good. I like that. It's got over a 1/4 inch. That's going to line up perfectly once the top border's sewn in. I'm liking that. Whoops. Get my ruler out of the middle of the quilt. Look at that. There we go. Isn't that cool? Okay, I'm happy with the sew on that one. All the way down to the end. That I'm happy with. Totally happy with. Alright, so now let's trim this up. Okay, let's start with this side. Make sure you have all the bulk of the quilt out of your way. Okay. So I'm going to come down here. I don't have to do this after I press. I can do this now because I want to press all the seams at the same time. So now I'm looking at this inside border. And I know it's 1.5 inches still at this point because I haven't sewn the top border on the inner border yet. So I'm going to make sure that I keep that all the way to the end. So I want 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. This little piece of fabric is like 1/8 of an inch short, the one right under here. I'm not going to worry about that because that will still be picked up when I sew the top border on and will disappear in the seam allowance and will still be good. So I want to trim this fabric level with that 1.5 inch border here. Okay, you can see it's just a teeny bit short. It'll be just fine when we sew the top border on. That's why we allow 1/4 inch seam allowance. It allows for any little mistakes like that, like I happen to trim it a teeny bit too short. Allow my 1.5 inches all the way down. Then I can trim that fabric off as well. Again, this one is less than 1/8 of an inch short. That again will be fit in perfectly with the seam allowance. Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing for the other end, and we need to do this now so that we can sew the top border on, and then we'll do this one, and then we can sew the bottom border on. You've done the two hardest borders, the left and the right, because they're the longest. So that's when I want to do those first, and then you're like, oh yeah, the top and bottom is easy. Very easy. Okay, again, lining it up. So I have 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches. Now this is the one where we're going to cut off some of the quilting. So double check your math. Yeah, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches all the way over. It's level. Take a deep breath. It's okay. We can trim that off, and maybe we can use that for like a little book or something, or a little pocket somewhere. So you can keep that. Okay. And that will look perfectly good in the quilt. Having that design cut off, not a problem. Okay, so now I'm going here, making sure my inner border's got that 1.5 inches all the way across. This is flat. Take a deep breath and trim that off. Again, you can use that for something. I'm thinking like a little pocket on a haunted project or something. We never waste materials, right? Right. So those look good. So that's the bottom border. So why don't we just start right where we are with the bottom. Make sure I've got that locked. Okay, so now I'm bringing in the bottom border. Isn't this amazing? I think this project is amazing on its own, but when you add those inner borders, it makes it even cuter than what it already was, because you have that phrase going around the outside. That's cool. So now we have plenty of embroidery to go all the way across. But I want to make sure now that I am going to start this embroidery down here. Okay, I don't want to start it with my inner border. I'm missing something here in a corner. I want to start it down here. Okay, and again, I want to make sure I have 1/4 inch. So I have my 1/4 inch seam allowance, which would be that. Okay, I want to make sure that I have at least 1/4 inch before my embroidery starts. So I'm going to bring it in just a little bit. So there would be my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and there it would start with just under 1/4 inch or so between. That's where I want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to flip it over, put a clip on it just for the moment, and then I want to remeasure from the edge of this border. I'll go this way. Can you still see it on camera? Yeah. So I know my 1/4 inch is where my seam allowance is going to be, right there. And it's over just a little bit, so I want to pull it down ever so slightly. Line it up with the edge of this border. I can see my 1/4 inch, and then it's about a 1/4 of an inch, and then that embroidery starts. So if I want to really do a good job, I can take a sneak peek and triple check. I think that's, yeah, that's where I want it to start. Yahoo, right? Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing that we did for the left and the right side borders. Is we're going to clip this into place, lining it up with my inner border edge down below, or your block edge down below. Okay. Main thing is you're making the bottom and the top level so they will sew nicely into your 1/4 inch seam allowance. These two are the easy ones. Like I said, you've done the hard ones because they were long, very, very long. Okay, let me put this up. Make sure the border is nice and flat. Put a clip there. And then I'm going to go all the way out and clip the edge of that border. And you can see we have just a little bit of embroidery left over to cut off, which is perfect. So our math worked. All that, a whole video that we did on math, this is when it pays off. Is when it works perfectly and you're only trimming off a little bit there, a little bit we did on the top, and you have enough embroidery to go all the way around. That's the way I like to do it. So I'm very happy when the math comes through. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to the sewing machine and let's sew this border on. Okay, this one's easy. All right, same thing. We're going to put the fabric down, line it up against that seam guide, take a couple stitches, take my clip off, make sure the border down below is flat, and I'm going to stitch until I make sure that I'm on and catching that bottom border, and I'm going to back tack. There's no use sewing and back tacking up here because it's not attached to the bottom border. You want to wait until you actually are sewing both pieces together before you back tack and lock your stitches in place. Let's go ahead and fast forward and let's stitch this border down. Okay, I'm at the end. Let me take the clip off and make sure I'm still lined up and that border is flat. Stitch to the end of the piece where you know you're on the bottom border and back tack. Alright, let's see what we did. Okay. Dun, da, da, da. All right. That's cool. I'm very happy with that. Very, very happy. All right. You are doing great. So now there's only one thing left to do. Roll it up. Get to the other end. And put this border on. Now, if you noticed, I'm putting the border again in the same direction as the seine. At the bottom of the quilt, the seine was facing this way, so I put the border facing the same way. Okay, you can go back and look at that. So my picture frame left and right, but then the bottom, my seine was facing upright, so I put my border facing upright. So you're reading it head on, okay, like that. I didn't go full picture frame effect on the bottom because I liked it better with the seine facing up instead of upside down. Okay, but however you did it, doesn't matter. However you did it, just make sure you're putting your borders on in the same direction. Okay, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong on how we do this. Okay, so I am now going to put this over, and I want it to line up on this end. Okay, so what I cut off will be on this right side. When you look visually at this, there won't be anything cut off on this side. The only cut off we'll have is on that side. All right, but you can pick whichever end you want to cut off. It doesn't really matter. You line it up with the direction of how you want it to be. And where you put your cutoff corners, it's totally up to you. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'll line it up in the direction I want it to be. I'm going to allow a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, allotment, and then just under another 1/4 of an inch before my design starts. So I can just gently flip it over and put a clip there temporarily. Okay, and then let's remeasure. So I've got it lined up with the edge of the border over here, so I can see my 1/4 inch, and then there's just a little bit more than a 1/4 of an inch before it starts. So I want to pull it back just the smallest amount. Let me double check it. Got it lined up with the edge here. I can see I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then there's just under 1/4 inch before the bottle starts. So that's perfect. Line it flat and clip it in place. Okay, you've got this. You're going to be a pro at doing borders now. So when it comes to any Kimberbell project, you will be able to figure out the math for what you need, figure out the design size of what you need, stitch it all out, and assemble the borders. And this instruction series, the 5-part that I'm doing for these borders, are good for any Kimberbell project. So if you are doing Shout Hurrah, or you are doing Main Street Celebration, or you're doing Cup of Cheer, and you do your borders, it's the same process. Okay, so you don't have to wait for me to do a video on those borders. You can watch this video series, this 5-part, and get everything you need to do any Kimberbell border. That was my hope. Okay, all right, we got this. Am I connected on the end? Yes, I am. So all we gotta do is sew this on. You ready? Let's do it. Okay. Last border. Same thing. I'm gonna put it down. Put it on the fabric that's off the border. Take this, make sure that I've got everything lined up with the bottom. Take a couple stitches and get on that border, and then back tack. Okay, let's fast forward and let's sew this border on. You can do it. Okay, so now I'm almost at the end. I'm going to take this off, keep it flat, make sure it's lined up. I know where the end of the border is. I'm going to go all the way off of it, right there, and then I'm going to back tack all the way back on it. Perfect. Alright, now let's see what we did. Okay, our ruler out of the way. Moment of truth. Nice. Stray threads. Nice. Okay, I am happy with that. So there's a couple things left that we have to do. I'm going to line it this way and get my ruler. And you want this to be as straight as you can get it, because the only thing that's going to go on this now is binding when you're all done with the quilt. Okay, so I've lined it up with the edge of the quilt. I like how that is. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit that way. Can line it up with my border too. All right, here we go. Okay. And now we're going to, I don't like that. Wasn't quite as straight as I would like it. Just a little bit there, so I want to trim that off. Okay. That's better. Okay, so I'm going to come this way and do the same thing with this edge. Line up my ruler. That looks good. Take that edge off. Okay, looking good. So now we only have to do that to the other end. Look at that. Look at how cool that is. I have to say, that really, really looks amazing, because it's like double framed. It's like a frame with a mat. That's the word I'm trying to get to. It's a frame with a mat. Okay. Gonna go down to the other end and do the exact same thing. Lining up my ruler with the edge here. I can see I'm in alignment with the inner border, and just cut that little edge off. And one more side. Okay. Make this a little bit easier so you can see it. There we go. All right. Gonna come out, line it up. My ruler. I'm going to line it up all the way out to there. Okay. Nice. All right, so the last thing that you need to do is you need to take this over to your ironing station, and you need to flip this over. Still use a pressing sheet when you do this, and press your seam toward the outside edge, just like you did for the inner border. Push and press that seam toward the outside, and then take your clapper and flatten it down on each section, and do that for all of the outside borders. Because there's no embellishment in the borders, you can just put your iron on the back side here. Just don't get it anywhere near the interior block. So again, I do it upside down, and I'm just going to be pressing over here and over here. I'm not going toward the inner blocks, but I'm still going to use my pressing sheet. Okay? Because that way you're not going to melt any of this vinyl. Isn't that cool? Look at this. Isn't that awesome? I love the two borders together. I think it really looks cool. Just go all the way to the top here. Look at this. Look at this. And then your top. Let's put the clapper down to keep it in place for right now. Isn't that cool? I'll definitely take a better picture hanging up to show you how amazing this is. I am thrilled with the combination of the two borders. I think it gives it a nice frame. It's like a picture frame with a mat. I love it. Absolutely love it. So go ahead and press your seams down. On the back side, like I said, use a pressing sheet, and then your borders are done. So the only thing we have left to do are the embellishments. Isn't this fun? I hope you had as much fun today working on these borders as I did. And I hope you stay tuned here on Jolly Molly TV for more fun and the rest of the videos on the embellishments for Kimberbell's Pumpkins and Potions ladder quilt project. So until I see you next time, happy stitching. Bye-bye.